Well, good morning. Come have a seat by the fire. It's just starting to get good. We'll have some stories and sit around and relax a bit on today's episode of Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. So go ahead and get comfy, get yourself a hot beverage, and let's settle in for some great stories and some great times. Today's story is a bit of a cautionary tale. We all want to be a little bit helpful, a little bit charitable, but maybe think twice next time you decide to pick up The Hitchiker. I could have flown home, but I thought a drive would clear my head. I'd just finished 4 years in the Marines, 4 of the messiest years of my life. I'd made the mistake of bringing my new wife to California with me, and returned from Iraq to find her warming someone else's bed. The bed in question was of a fellow Marine, someone left on base while I fought and bled for my country. 6 months of staying on base so I could meet with lawyers and finish my divorce, and I was officially out and done. When I told my dad I was going to rent a car and drive home, he understood. I told him I needed to come back slow so I could clear my mind, and he told me to drive safe. "Take your time, kid. We'll be here when you get back," he said, and I took him up on it. I was coming across the country, California to Tennessee, and I was seeing the sights and taking in the local flavor. I had decided to make this a long overdue vacation. I did a lot of things on that trip, but my only mistake was picking the kid up. I was driving through Oklahoma, enjoying the sights and feeling like I could watch the hills and valleys roll by forever, when I saw the kid standing there with his thumb out. He was young, couldn't have been old enough to enlist, despite his army coat. It was July, the heat stifling, but he was wearing fatigues and a service jacket that looked antique. The breeze ruffled his hair, pushing it back in a harsh puff that made me think of kids blowing on dandelion fluff. Maybe it was the jacket, or maybe it was the look of naked want on his face. But I pulled up beside him and rolled the window down. "Hey kid, you need a lift?" He turned his perfect sky blue eyes on me, and I'll never forget his words. Sometimes I hear them in my sleep. "I sure do. Can you give me a lift to McMahon, mister? God'll thank you if you do." I thought that was a little weird, but I told him to climb in, and he did so gladly. The signs told me that McCann was about 30 miles up the road, and I expected the kid to chatter like a squirrel the whole way. To my surprise, he was quiet, his eyes closed, and his head bowed for a couple of minutes. It took me a second to realize he was praying, and when he finished, he sat up and plastered a half-daffy grin on his face. "God tell you I'm a straight shooter?" I asked, more to break the ice than anything. "He said thank you for your assistance, mister, and you'll be greatly rewarded in his kingdom." I nodded, thinking I could use all the help I could get. The farther we drove, the more I began to suspect that something was off about the kid. He stared forward the whole way, his eyes on the horizon, his mouth seemed set in an eternal grin. He wasn't as young as I'd thought, maybe 18 or 19, and the jacket said his name was Harris, had it stenciled right there over the left breast. It was covered in patches, too, the kind you get for service, and I was glancing at one over his right pocket when I saw the bulge under the coat. I felt a cold shudder run through me as I recognized it. The kid was packing. You look a little young for the service, kid," I said, trying to dissuade some of my fear. "Your brother give you that jacket? Was he in Iraq, like me?" "My dad left it to me when he died," the kid said, matter-of-factly. "Sorry to hear that. Was he in Iraq?" "Gulf War," he said, his voice not matching the grin. "He enlisted before it started and was there a couple of years after it ended." "I bet he had some stories," I said with a nod. I had been about to start in on one of my sandbox tales, but the kid cut me off suddenly with the last thing I expected. "You believe in God, mister?" I blinked, the subject unexpected. "Not really, kid. I'm an atheist. Have been since after what happened to me overseas. I think that if there is a God, it's a pretty crummy thing for him to do, to let us live here like this." I'd expected a fight, but the kid just nodded. "He forgives you for that. Daddy was like you," Mama said, "before he went to war. He saw something over there, bad things, and he came back from the war looking for God. He said he had seen some things over there that scared him, made him want to be better, and he couldn't do better without some help. So he came back and started looking for a purpose, and he found one. He found a lot of people offering purpose, but only one who delivered. By the time I was born, he was part of the family." I listened politely, not wanting to interrupt the kid, but the way he was talking about his dad's search for God made me a little concerned. It didn't seem like a happy memory. "I was born into the family. Father Marcus was our everything, our teacher, our preacher, our second father, our salvation. He brought a lot of people together, lots of lost people, but that wasn't enough. Father Marcus wanted more. He had plans, big plans, but they wouldn't turn out to be so good for us." He was quiet for a minute, looking out the glass and seeming lost in thought. I thought again that he had to be a kid, couldn't be out of high school, but maybe it was just whatever was wrong with him. Even though his eyes looked like he was in the worst pain imaginable, he still wore that plastered-on grin, the one that never reached those eyes. He was like a doll with a troubled owner, a doll that smiles through its destruction. When I was 10, Father Marcus told the congregation that the end was coming. He told them that the government was going to come down and take everything that we had built here, and that the devil was set against us, and we needed to escape. He told everybody to sell their things, bring just the bare minimum, and come to a place that he had found. It was a farm on the outskirts of town, a big farm that had once been a dairy. They gave him their money so that he could secure their paradise, free from anything that the government or the devil or anybody else might do, and came there to start their new lives. We were hopeful that this would be our paradise, but it wasn't a paradise. In the end, it was a prison. I felt a chill run up my spine as he said that. I wanted to tell him to stop. I didn't want to hear the end of it, but instead I just listened. The kid was hurting. That was clear enough, but his story was so captivating. It was like one of those true crime stories, the ones so bad that you just know it has to be true. I kept my eyes on the road and listened, just letting him tell it, already knowing that it wouldn't have a happy ending. We were basically his slaves. We worked in the fields. We took care of the animals. We kept the big house where he lived and did his bidding. Father Marcus came down to spit the hellfire every night and to pass down new edicts and rules. Men were not permitted in the big house. No one but Father Marcus could lay with a woman, even within a marriage. All children were Father Marcus's children, but his actual children were special. Eventually, he took all the women that he liked up to the house to populate the earth. He took my sister up there with him, and we never saw her again. People didn't like it much, but what could they do? Father Marcus was keeping us safe from the apocalypse, right? So we followed his orders, till everything fell apart. We rolled into the outskirts of McMahon then, the farms and barns making me think of the place the kid was talking about. I wondered suddenly where we were going, why the kid wanted to go to McMahon so bad. Every mile felt like an eternal march, and I was dreading coming to the end of the journey. "Where?" I started, but the kid seemed to be expecting the question. "Stay on the main road, mister," he said, clearing his throat before going on. He seemed as dry as an old stick, and when I reached behind the seat and offered him a Coke from the cooler, he took it with a smile. I wondered why I'd done that. I didn't want the kid to go on, but in a way I did. I needed the end of it. I needed to know how it had all shook out. I was a curious bastard, it seemed, and I needed to see the bodies in this kid's path. Then one day he gathered us in the barn and told us that the end was near. He told us we needed to prepare ourselves to go because we were meeting God tonight. He gave us all something to drink, something in a red cup that his wives dipped out, and we all drank it. No one argued. No one fought him. We were all so brainwashed that we would have jumped in front of the 6:15 train that ran near the farm if he'd asked. Everyone drank. Everyone obeyed. Everyone went to sleep. They stayed asleep too, except for me. I woke up in the hospital with tubes in my arm and my wrists secured to the bed. The police were there, one of them waiting in the room with me, and they had questions. Turned out that they were the ones who had been coming, not God. They had arrived to find everyone dead, falling around the barn like dolls, but had managed to get there in time to save me. I don't know why I lived while everyone else died, and it ate at me for a long time. Father Marcus, my family, everyone was gone, and I'd been left behind. No one wanted anything to do with me. My dad had burned a lot of bridges before we went into the family, and none of them wanted to take in a moody 16-year-old who'd just been through hell. So, I went into the system, going from group home to group home, till a couple of weeks ago. I clutched the wheel hard, suddenly very worried about what we might find in McMahon. The town was coming up now, a nice old brick town that looked downright picturesque. We passed a sign for a new megachurch, the Sunrise Gospel House, and there was a smiling old man beaming down from the front. The kid shot a glare at him and patted his heart, inevitably patting the piece as well. I suddenly wondered who was in McMahon that this kid needed to see. I was watching TV in the group home, and an ad came on for a church. The church had recently acquired its own network, and the pastor of the church was very familiar. He spoke about peace and God's love, but all I could hear was the voice that told us to drink the juice and go meet God. As I watched him smiling and hugging people, I heard a very different voice in the back of my mind. It was God, the real God, and he told me what I had to do. He said I needed to be his sword, and I needed to cleave the unrighteous from his midst. He patted the gun again, whispering a prayer to God, and my hair stood up on the back of my neck as something strong and strange wafted from the kid. In that moment, he felt very righteous. We were well into town now, rolling up Main Street, and he told me to stop. I dropped the kid off at the light, and he thanked me, said he could make it from here. He gave me a real smile then, not the dopey one he'd been wearing the whole way through as he told his sad little tale, and waved at me. God bless you, mister. I'm off to do his work. Then he was gone, and I sat there watching him until someone politely honked behind me, and I was forced to roll along. I wasn't sure what to do as I made my way out of town. Did I tell somebody? If this pastor had really messed the kid up like that, then maybe he had it coming. Was that really my call to make, though? In the end, I called the McMahon Police Department and told them what I suspected. I told them about the kid and the story that he had spilled, but I don't think they took me seriously. The dispatcher made it sound like it was going into a little pile of crackpot shit, but I felt I had done my due diligence. I was still thinking about it when I stopped for the night, wondering where the kid was and what he was doing as I drifted off to sleep. I woke up the next day and turned on the news to see that Pastor Michael Wheeler of the Sunrise Gospel House had been shot in front of his congregation. The pastor, someone wanted by the FBI for his alleged connections to several past cults, had been shot by someone from one of his past religious orders. The kid was in custody, but the police were saying he was mentally unwell, and this was likely a retaliation slang. Police were still looking for a mysterious caller who had tipped them off before the shooting, and they had many questions for that individual. I left Oklahoma as quickly as I could, flinching every time I saw a cop. That was a couple of years ago, and I've never told anybody what happened on that trip home. It's something that's weighed on me since I left that kid on Main Street, and I can only imagine that he was right about God blessing me. I came back, found a job that paid well, met the love of my life, and settled into wedded bliss fairly easily. It all seemed very easy while it was happening, and I can't help but wonder if a little divine direction had anything to do with it. As long as he doesn't point me at his enemies like he did that kid, I suppose we can be square. Let's move right on with our tales of strange highway encounters, though this one is of a pervasive presence of a different sort. We've all had a little bit of maybe highway amnesia. Maybe you slip off for a little bit. Maybe you just don't pay as much attention as you should. But we all hope that we don't slip into something like we're talking about today. Let's hope that on your next trip you don't fall victim to the gray of sunset. It happened when I was on my way home from the flea market across state lines. I sell things I make out of junk mostly. The term is trash sculptures in the community I belong to, but I never liked that term. Some may call this junk, but to me, they're treasures. I make all kinds of things, from stuff I find at the dump. People, vehicles, animals, whatever catches my eye. They sell pretty good, but not in my home state. I usually end up driving to Sadie's Flea Market, one of these huge, sprawling outdoor markets in Alabama, to sell my wares. The people there love them, and today was the first time in a while that I've come home with anything. I was loading the sitter into the back of my truck as the sun went down. I had made him out of rebar and old license plates. He was definitely unique looking. I had some lookers, but he was a little heavy for my usual crowd. The sitter was what you would call an end-of-the-day purchase, to be sure, and no one was buying him today. I sat him in the back of the truck and grinned as he sort of looked like he was just sitting there, just resting in the bed of the truck after a long day of being on display. With my passenger secured, I cleaned up my stall and rolled out of the parking lot just as it was starting to get dark. The road was busy, but not overly so. It's about an hour to my house through some pretty rural countryside. I never minded. It's a pretty soothing view as you roll along towards the Florida-Alabama line. Most of the route is roadside stands, abandoned buildings, gas stations, and the ever-popular fireworks stand. It's hard to explain, but it always seems so desolate out here. A single pole light shining beside the shell of an abandoned house, an old store that's slowly being retaken by the woods, a rotting cooler that someone had left by the roadside, its mouth wide open and its inside scummy. These were little things that reminded me that humanity had once had hope for these places that are out of the way, and it made me wish I had the skill to use a camera properly. Some artistic type would probably have paid a mint for pictures of some of these things. As I drove, I saw other people getting ready to leave. The sun was setting, and it washed them out in a way that's hard to explain. It's strange, but the setting sun always seems to gray these people a little, making them look like actors in an early 90s show. The sunset seems to bleed all the color out of them, and it's kind of nostalgic for me. It always seemed comfortable. At least, it did until today. As I drove for the state line, the sun turned the trees into a fiery corona, a forest fire that burned on and on until it was snuffed out with the eventual setting of the sun. It started rather subtly. I had chalked it up to the sun, having gone down when I first noticed it. But as I drove past a familiar barn, I had to double-take. The barn was old, older than me probably, but it looked like something drawn in a sketchbook. It's hard to put into words, but it just looked flat and unfinished. As I watched, the light on the barn threw only a small circle of illumination, and the yard itself looked grainy and unreal. I watched as a cat scampered across the yard, and he looked like he might be made out of graphite, like graphite lines that had learned to walk and move all on their own. I rubbed at my eyes as I rolled along. Pretty sure I was just getting tired. I had been making sculptures and putting together today's pieces all week, and I was probably just starting to feel the strain. A little sleep was all I needed, and once I got home, I could start burning my candle at both ends again tomorrow. The sitter would sit in my truck till I woke up tomorrow morning, and I'd have added another piece or two by next Saturday. I didn't think much of it as I rolled along until I saw the houses. The farther I drove, the harder it was to just ignore the strange changes in the landscape. I drove past a trailer park, and I could see all the gray lead outlines as the windows glowed. The insides looked like they were lit by bug zappers, that harsh fluorescent light making them seem to crackle. The spotlights made the concrete look porous, almost holy, and the dog resting out in front looked like if he were to bark, it would come out as a word bubble. It was all so very unreal, and I had to look down at my own hands in order to discover whether I, too, looked like a pencil sketch. I was pleased to find my normal level of realness, and just kept driving as I tried to get past whatever I had driven into. It didn't get bad until I came to the stoplight, though. There was only one stoplight before you got to the state line. It's probably there to allow people leaving the gas station or the liquor store to get back on the highway so they don't get creamed. The gas station had only a single light over the pump, but the inside looked welcoming. It reminded me of that painting, the one of the dead celebrities in the diner, and I was half tempted to turn in when something whooshed up to my left, and I turned to see a fire going on the side of the liquor store. It wasn't much more than a one-room building that sold beer and wine. I had driven past that pink stucco building 1,000 times, but it had an evil look to it tonight. It didn't glow like the trailers or the gas station did, and its face was dark and brooding as the glass reflected the fire on the side of it. At that moment, it seemed the antithesis of the gas station, and sitting across the street from each other, they almost seemed adversarial. The cars in the parking lot were the old rusty sort, pickups and dark-colored Cadillacs and long cigar-shaped constructions. They seemed to hunch around the lot like gargoyles, but as the fire began to build, I noticed the strange people that were feeding it. The store had a cage beside it, something the employees filled with cardboard boxes and trash and then burned when it got full. As I watched, the human-shaped creatures that seemed to be made of squiggly darkness were throwing boxes onto the fire and watching as they burned. The people weren't even approximations of people. They looked like a child's idea of human shapes, the bodies bulbous and the heads lumpy. Their arms were muscled, and their legs disproportionately squat. They looked like orcs in the Lord of the Rings books, and just looking at them made me a little uneasy. They were supposed to be humans, but I had never seen anything less human in my life. They looked like natives in an old jungle picture, dancing around a flaming idol, and as I watched, I saw one of them take notice of me. I glanced back at the light, but it was hard to tell what color it was. All three were shades of gray, and as they flipped through, I couldn't tell what I was supposed to do. Something moved in front of that grainy flame then, drawing my attention back to the liquor store. The four of them froze as they saw that I had noticed them, their red eyes glaring as they prepared to run at my truck. Red or green, I no longer cared. I put my foot on the gas and blew through the intersection, rolling up the road as the four lumpy homunculuses watched me go. My tires squealed as they flew up the blacktop. The trees and the buildings we passed had begun to pulsate a little, their lead edges crackling like lightning. The whole thing looked like a Tex Avery cartoon, something from a sketchbook nightmare skit from an old show, and the longer I watched the sky, the less I cared about the road. My eyes were glued to that fuzzy space, the graphite lining sending phosphorescent clarity through the steely gray sky. Something was rising up amongst the clouds, a silver orb of a moon that suddenly and unexpectedly filled me with fear. Then it rolled in the sky, and I was suddenly looking at the eye of some great beast. It swam in that inky space, this perfect orb, and when it found me, I began to shake. The eye looked straight at me, fixing me with its gaze, not blinking as it regarded me, and that regard bore into me. I found myself unable to look away. When the harsh lights and the equally harsh horn invaded my space, I continued to be aware of nothing but that huge blinking moon. Then, suddenly, everything went black, and I was left floating in the inky blackness until the beeping brought me back to the waking world. I was in a hospital, arm aching from the IV and head pounding from the wound that had likely landed me there. My sister had been playing on her phone, but she looked up when I started groaning back to consciousness. She stopped me from getting up, and I realized that I only saw her out of the corner of one eye. Thankfully, the other was just covered in bandages, but at the time, it was pretty jarring. My sister filled me in and said she was glad I had come out because no one understood what had happened. According to the man in the moving truck, the one I had scared half to death, I had crossed into his lane as he was driving from the depot. He had swerved, barely avoiding the truck, and he said when I left the road something had fallen out of the back, and he had thought my passenger might have slid out. I had proceeded into the nearby woods before the tree had stopped my progress. It wasn't until he went to check on my passenger that he realized it was nothing but a dented metal doll, and went to check on me. He had helped me out of the truck and stayed with me till the ambulance came, and that was how I had ended up spending the next 4 days in a coma. I don't know what happened, and I can't really explain it, but somehow I slipped into something very different. The road I'd come to know was not what I had driven that night, and I suddenly found myself in a place that I couldn't come to terms with. I tried to tell people that, but they seemed to believe that I might have been drugged, or maybe I had picked up something I couldn't handle at the flea market. They never found anything heavier than Xanax in my system, though. My sister had floated the idea that I fell asleep and had a dream before I drove off the road, but I know what I saw. I saw those things, and I'm lucky to have escaped. So if you're driving the highways of America, be on the lookout for pockets of strangeness, and good luck to you if you happen to slip into one of them. Looks like we're moving on from strange roadways to strange homes. I've certainly let my house's cleanliness go a little bit from time to time, but never quite this bad. So let's investigate the glowing tunnel. My brother and I work for a cleaning company in our hometown. We're both still in high school. He's a junior and I'm a senior. So it was either this or fast food. The owner is a friend of Dad's. We'll call him Chuck to protect the innocent. Chuck's a nice enough guy. My brother and I have known him since we were young, but he leaves a lot to be desired as a businessman. Don't misunderstand. The guy makes money, but he seems to think that employee safety comes after profit. My brother and I worked like dogs for him all summer, cleaning out people's yards and moving boxes out of abandoned houses. Anything to make a buck, I guess. It was nearly July when Chuck got a call from another of his old friends, Philip O'Dare. If Chuck is a little underhanded in his business practices, then Philip is a goddamn pirate. He's the town's #1 real estate agent, and I mean everything when I say that he sells everything. He owns a pawn shop, broke brokers, with his younger brother. When he wasn't out selling houses, he was looking for homes to buy. The homes he picks up are rough, most of the time. If he were selling them a fixer-upper, that would be okay. The problem is that after he picks up these houses for next to nothing, he does shoddy Band-Aid repairs on them. Then he sells them for top prices, usually to pick them back up a few years later when the occupants move out in disgust. My current situation is thanks in part to Philip's underhanded renovations and Chuck's less than stellar business sense. The Foskey place? I asked. I didn't even know Mr. Foskey was dead. Chuck looked up from his notepad, his gray hair making him look like a cloud with glasses. He's not. Foskey's son sent him to Golden View and sold his house to O'Dare Real Estate. That made me a little sad. Mr. Foskey had been my English teacher when I was in middle school, and he had also taught Dad when he was in 8th grade. My brother had not been what you would call an advanced English compatible student, so he didn't get him. But Dad and I both agreed that Mr. Foskey was the best. He always had such cool lesson plans and exciting books in his class library. He challenged his advanced students to be more than a title and wanted us to be more than just A-plus students. I was sad to hear that he had been fired a couple of years ago. He had started to get a little senile in his old age. Everyone said so. and his taste in books had always been a little esoteric. After he'd been fired, he'd become a hermit. He only came out at night, and the word around town was that he'd been going through people's garbage. What he sought was anyone's guess, but people came to visit him and said his house was full of junk. Now he was gone, off to the mental hospital in the next town, and we were left to clean up his house. Phil says to save anything that looks valuable. Apparently the guy had a ton of old books that were probably worth money. Foskey's son sold Phil the house and everything in it, so don't bother saving anything sentimental. A couple of weeks in the puzzle factory and the old man probably won't even remember his own name. I left before I could say anything stupid. The thought of a brilliant man like Mr. Foskey losing his mind in a place like Golden View made me sick at the time. Now, I think it might be exactly what he deserves. We arrived at 6 a.m. Philip was waiting for us, a cell phone against his ear and a latte in his other hand. He was dressed in his usual blue suit, and I imagine we looked pretty shabby next to him, in our jeans and black t-shirts with the company name on them. My brother had rolled the sleeves up on his motorcycle boots peeking out from beneath the cuffs of his new jeans. He was going through some kind of James Dean phase, but it really just made him look like an extra in Grease. We waited for Philip to finish, and when he did, he looked at us like we were in the way. "Well, what are you waiting for?" "A breakdown on what exactly we're doing," I said a little hotly. "Thought you boys were smart. Clean the damn house and save what can be sold. Old bastard bought the house 5 years ago after his kids moved out. It's a 1-bedroom, 1-bath, and I have a client who wants to see it Wednesday, so if you could not take all week about it, that would be great. We'll take a look and let you know by the end of the day, okay?" He scoffed again, clearly saving all that charm for his clients. "Just have it done. I'll pay you double if you can finish it by Wednesday. You, not your boss." That was a tempting offer. Chuck was great, but he tended to be a little tight with the checks. We were being paid under the table, so we couldn't really argue, but some extra cash would be sweet. I shook Philip's hand, and he said to have it done by Wednesday. He nodded and left, the sound of his T-Bird cutting up the road as he went. I immediately regretted my words when I saw inside the house. The house had a strange floor plan. There was a living room, a dining room with a bar that overlooked from the kitchen. Off the kitchen was a bathroom, and a door to get out back where you could sit in a small backyard. Off the living room was another door that I guessed was to the bedroom. The house had a strange sort of feel to it when you came inside, and I could believe that such a place would draw Mr. Foskey to it. It was eccentric in a practical way, a way that he would have understood. The living room dining room was full of trash and furniture, stuff floor to ceiling, and I could see a little walkway from the living room to the kitchen. The kitchen was spared the worst of it, but it was still covered in garbage. The floor was a solid foot of garbage. The cabinets were covered in old food wrappers, and the refrigerator seemed clean, though it wouldn't open due to the junk on the floor. The cabinets were stuffed with garbage, and I sighed as I thought about the job at hand. This looked like a good week's worth of work between the living room and the kitchen alone. I'll take the kitchen, you take the living room. Whoever finishes first will help the other. "Why do you get the kitchen?" I rolled my eyes at him. "I see a lot of furniture in there, football star. You got Dad's build, so you do the heavy lifting." "Guess that means you got Mom's build, so I guess you can get your bitch ass in the kitchen," he said with a laugh. We put on our respirators, rubber boots, and thick gloves. We hadn't seen anything that would make us break out the hazmat suits yet, but I like to be safe. We were definitely working with some old refuse, possibly refuse that had been outside, which meant that rodents were a danger, as well as insects. We were cleaning out a shed like this not even a month ago, and ran upon a secret hornet's nest. That had made us wary about attacking big mounds of trash, so I was careful to look where I was putting my hands as I started in the kitchen. I got lucky. The trash was mostly dry and clean, and it was easily bagged up. I heard my brother straining and grunting in the living room, and I looked out to see him wrestling with a sizable piece of furniture. He was dragging it out onto the lawn. Philip had a mobile storage unit pointing out front, and then loading them into the unit. I watched him groan as he tried to lift an antique dining room table, which had been the linchpin on a large pile of garbage before going to help him. The pile fell over as we freed the table, and I helped him lug it out onto the yard. This is how we spent our first day, at least till mid-afternoon. By 4, I had all the garbage out of the kitchen. My brother had gotten most of the furniture out of the living room, and was wiping sweat off his brow as he stuffed papers into a bag. "Doesn't this guy have AC?" "I haven't seen a thermostat. Maybe it's in the bedroom." My brother stood up and walked to the door, coming off the living room. As he opened it, I heard him whistle, and came to see what he had found. Inside the bedroom was a tunnel of solid junk. It snaked to the left, getting dim inside, and the tunnel looked as though someone had cut it out of solid junk. "You sure you want to go in there?" I asked. He just rolled his eyes and took a pen light out of his pocket. "This shouldn't take long," he said as he tromped into the room. I stood for a few seconds, making sure the whole pile wouldn't just fall over, and went back to work in the kitchen. I should have gone with him, maybe been a little more attentive, but I was in a hurry and really wanted to have a look at the bathroom before quitting time. I got all the garbage bags out of the cabinets, stuffed 6 bags with nothing but trash. I unearthed the sink and the microwave and had started cleaning the countertops when I noticed something wasn't right. The trash was still in the same place my brother had left it, and the door to the bedroom still hung open. Was he still in there? There was no way it had taken him an hour to navigate the bedroom and find the thermostat. I called his name into the bedroom. The name almost seemed to echo down the trash hall, but there was no answer. It was starting to get close to sunset, and I really wanted to be out of here before dark. Thinking maybe he had fallen or gotten hurt in there, I grabbed a headlamp and headed into the trash maze. I turned the corner and was bombarded by the claustrophobia of the trash tunnel. The tunnel was a solid mass of trash that seemed almost sculpted. It was like someone had built a wall out of mortar and trash and then cut a tunnel out of it. There was a soft light coming from the garbage wall, and when I turned off my headlamp, I found I could see. The dim light seemed to be coming from something inside the wall, but even with the headlamp on, I couldn't tell what it was. It made navigating the strange, winding maze a little easier, but the size started to unsettle me as I moved. The bedroom was supposedly 12 by 12, but this maze seemed to be winding on farther than the whole house. I'd been taking turns for several minutes when I came upon the first strange sight. Coming around a bend, I came face to face with a small library. A small grotto held 4 bookcases, stuffed with old-looking books. Many of them were covered in mold, and as I got close, I could see bugs moving across them. I backed away and kept walking, not sure how deep this rabbit hole went, but wanting to be out more and more with every step. I kept looking down periodically, seeing if I could see a print from my brother's big rubber boots in the dust. I was looking for any sign that he had passed this way, but I was coming up with nothing so far. Then I came upon the old man. I turned a corner and found myself in a 10 by 10 park with honest-to-God grass. There was a lamppost that spilled light over the old park bench, and an old man sat on it, feeding real pigeons. As I approached, he patted the bench as though he wanted me to sit. One look at the old man told me that I did not want to sit there. He was dressed in a long coat that looked patched and frayed, a fuzzy old cap obscuring his face. He patted the seat again as I approached, but I had already decided that I would not be stopping. The whole situation was a little creepy, and I intended to just walk on and continue on my way. When his hand shot out and grabbed me, I nearly jumped a foot. His hand was covered in thick green mold, and when he looked up, I could see the same mold growing on his face. He grinned his gap-toothed smile at me, and for a moment, I thought it was Mr. Foskey. His grip was firm, but moist, and when I pulled away, his hand slipped off, and he sat there, grinning at me. Something clamped down on my ankle then, and I looked down to see that he was feeding rats. These were wharf rats, too, no cute pet shop mice, and as they tried to scuttle up my rubber boot, I kicked out at them and turned to run. The old man was standing then, a creaky moan coming from his dusty throat, but I was out of the park and into the tunnel again. I ran, flat out, and as I ran, I imagined I could see lights in the wall reaching out for me. Their brightness came reaching out towards me, and I ducked away from them as I came. The tunnel seemed to be nightmarishly claustrophobic as I ran, and I began taking turns at random. I had no idea where I was or where I was going. I only knew that I wanted to be out. I prayed that this tunnel would end, and I would just flop out onto the carpet in the dirty living room, that my brother would be waiting there for me. He would wonder where I had been and what had taken me so long, and we would leave and never come back to this place. Screw O'Dare, and screw his money too. As I stopped panting, clutching the stitch in my side, I just wanted to be out. That's when I heard the footsteps. They echoed strangely up the tunnel, and they filled me with a deep sense of dread. Was it the old man coming after me? Some new horror? I didn't know, but the steps were heavy and ominous, and I knew that I did not want them to find me. I hid around the corner in a little trash alcove and shuddered in my cowardice. The steps grew closer. I was shaking all over. The footsteps were slow and knowing. I just knew it was some kind of new monster that wanted me. It was some mold monster that was trying to invade me like it had invaded the old man. It was the old man who wanted to breathe spores into me and infect me. I didn't know what it was, and I didn't care. At that moment, I just wanted to leave, and I was willing to kill to get out of here. Clump, clump, clump. I saw a rock on the ground. Clump, clump, clump. It looked jagged, broken like a paving stone. Clump, clump, clump. I picked it up and held it against my chest. Clump, clump, clump. I closed my eyes and steeled myself for what I was about to do. Clump, 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 clump. I rounded the corner and swung the stone, and it connected with something that immediately staggered back, bellowing. I swung it again, but it hit me around the waist and drove me to the ground. I dropped the rock in the skirmish, and as it rolled away, I felt hands close around my throat. It was choking me, choking the life out of me, and as I groped around, I could see little black swirls at the corners of my vision. I swung my fist out at it, but without oxygen, it was a weak swing at best. I went back to groping, trying to find something, and finally, my hands settled on something hard and jagged. I grabbed the rock and swung it, filling my lungs with air as the hands loosened, and the shape fell away. I lifted the rock and swung it down at the shape, hitting it in the head. I straddled it, swinging it again and again and again, until it finally stopped moving. I was panting then, out of breath, covered in sweat, but I felt my breath escape in a sudden whoosh when I flipped on the headlamp. I was choking again. I could not find any air. I was straddling a human being, his face mostly caved in, but the rolled-up shirt sleeves were a dead giveaway. He was wearing our shirt, the shirt with the two happy moving men on the front, and as I threw the rock away, the tears began to flow. I jumped off him and ran, leaving him in the tunnel to God only knows what. I ran in a blind panic. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, and I just kept running. I ran until my legs burned and my lungs heaved. I bumped into the walls and saw them crumble around me. As they fell, I felt the trap envelop me. I embraced the entombing refuse as my fate. I had killed my brother. I deserved to be encased in garbage for all eternity. I deserved it. I deserved it. I could see flashing lights and was aware of being carried. I opened my eyes to see two paramedics rolling me into an ambulance. Chuck was following behind them, clearly panicked. Philip was there too, but he looked more aggravated than worried. As we drove away in the ambulance, I looked around. They seemed to become aware that I wasn't unconscious. What happened? I asked, and the two of them filled me in. Philip had come out after dark to check on our progress. After finding the house mostly still cluttered, he had called Chuck and told him to get down there. The house was still a disaster, and his workers were nowhere to be found. When Chuck arrived, they found me passed out in the living room under a pile of garbage. They had called the paramedics, fearing I had broken my neck, and had then come to check me out. "Para says you're lucky to be alive, honestly," said Chuck. Philip elbowed him, wanting him to shut up. "Why?" I asked. He said the whole place was crawling with black mold. It was around the crown of the ceiling, the baseboards. Hell, the whole place was ate up. It's a good thing your brother left early, eh? I told Chuck I didn't remember him leaving. I told him about the bedroom, the tunnel, the strange things I'd seen there. I don't think Chuck believed me, but they did go back to the house to look for him. They came to see me in the hospital later that night, told me they hadn't seen a hide nor hair of him. He wasn't at home. They'd called Dad, and his truck was still at Chuck's place. They didn't know where he was, but they were sure he would turn up. I didn't answer that. A week later, they let me go, and I went back to the house. It's still a mess. The guys Philip got to clean it aren't as diligent as my brother and I, but they're great at leaving doors unlocked. I stood before the bedroom door like I expected it to open on its own and suck me in. It didn't, and when I finally opened it, I found not a tunnel, but a cluttered bedroom on the other side. Just a bedroom. No tunnel, no monsters, just a regular old bedroom. It's been 2 weeks, and no one's seen my brother. He's lying dead in some weird trash tunnel with his head caved in. A part of me knows this, but a part of me also knows that there is no trash tunnel behind that door. I don't know what to do. Dad is getting worried. The police have no leads, and I can't find the tunnel. I killed him. It's my fault. But if I tell people the story, they're going to lock me up in Goldenview right along with Mr. Foskey. I went to visit him a few days ago. No one's monitoring who visits the residence at Goldenview. When I asked him about the trash tunnel and the glowing mold, he just stared at me blankly. I begged him to tell me, screamed at him to help me find my brother, but whatever light was in Mr. Foskey when I was in his English class is gone now. Now he just sits in the day room and watches soap operas with the rest of them. I don't know what to do. How do I get my brother back? What will happen to whatever poor sap buys the house next when they open that door? Will they find their familiar bedroom? Or will they be the next victim of the glowing tunnel? Looks like I might need a few more logs for that fire. Maybe build it up a little bit. You're looking a little shivery. I hope it's not the stories. We've all had some strange pets, but let's hope yours isn't as strange as the subject of this next story. Some of you will remember Calvin from My Cat Caught a Rat, but this is the other side of that, the aftermath, if you will. So let's hear about the Exorcism of Calvin. I was almost giddy when the priest agreed to perform the exorcism. Father Maxey is actually fairly well known in the area. He had completed several rather public exorcisms, one of them on a councilman's daughter that had changed the girl so drastically that others had trouble disagreeing with his abilities. While some people believed he was just a well-meaning shyster, many people believed he was the real deal. He seemed to be just what I needed in my current situation. Sitting in his office at St. Marco's, it seemed oddly humble for a man like him. There was no extravagance in his office, only the humble set pieces of a public servant. The wall behind him held a picture of the softball team that he coached, of happy parishioners at a picnic, and smiling children at the hospital where he had gone to speak. He sat behind a very normal desk that you could have probably found at any IKEA, and his chair squeaked a little, letting me know that it had likely served him for quite some time. Sitting across from him, though, I could tell that he was anything but average. He seemed to exude power as he sat smiling at me, and I was confident that he was the right man for the job. "One of my parishioners said that you had reached out. What can I do for you today, my child?" I tried to find the best way to start, and finally decided to be honest with him. There's an entity in my house, one who has become darker and darker the longer he stays. He's entrenched himself, and I don't know how to get him out. The priest nodded, pulling out a notepad and taking a pencil from the holder. "Go on." It was nothing at first. Small offerings, things that didn't need to be in my house anyway. But he started hurting my cats, and now both of them are gone. It's not uncommon for entities like this to target small things that can't defend themselves. Has this entity taken up inside someone you love? A child or a wife, perhaps? Actually, it's taken up in one of my cats. The priest looked at me as if trying to see if he had misheard me. "I'm sorry, did you say a cat?" I nodded, certain now that he would laugh and tell me that I was overreacting. He would tell me to stop wasting his time and send me on my way. Then I'd have to go home to my apartment and look at that large orange feline and see the realization there. He would know what I had done, know where I had been, and I would likely suffer for it. To my surprise, the priest told me to tell him more, and I sighed in relief, glad to have someone who believed me. I had been living with Calvin for a year now, but the problem hadn't started until a few months ago. He was such a delight at first, he and his brothers filling my home with joy, but that was before he had begun to bring me gifts. Calvin loved the extra attention, loved the treats I gave him because of those gifts, and so he kept finding them, despite my confusion as to where they were coming from. I didn't mind, not much. Calvin was a good boy, and he was making the house safer by catching and bringing me his gifts. His brothers didn't understand. They were jealous of what he was getting, and that's likely what led to our current state of affairs. His brother had taken one of his gifts, and now he was gone. Very soon they were both gone, and Calvin's gifts became darker. Now he was bringing me things that I'm going to have to start having trouble explaining, and so I figured it was time to enlist the help of a professional. As I finished, the priest furrowed his brow and circled something on the notepad. "Are you sure it's the cat?" he asked. He didn't seem skeptical. He sounded more like he wanted to be sure before he made plans. "I am," I told him. "What makes you so sure? It could very well be someone breaking in and leaving these things. It could be something else entirely, something that you're not seeing." I shook my head. "It's definitely him, Father. The way he looks at me, the way he acts, it's all so different than it was before the rats. I don't know what it is. I don't know where it came from, but he's not the same cat that I took in a year ago. The anger and the heat in his eyes isn't something I've ever seen in a cat before. It's almost human, and its intensity, I don't know how much longer it'll be content to let me wander around in its space." Father McGhee nodded, putting the notebook into his pocket as he reached under the desk for a leather bag that looked like a toiletry holder more than anything. "Very well, let's go." I was speechless. Just like that? "My son, I've been in this business for a long time. I've learned to read people, and I can see that whatever this presence is, demonic or not, you are terrified of it. If my presence will help alleviate that terror, then I owe it to you and to God to go and have a look. Believe it or not, my calendar isn't as full as some people might think. I have to be back for evening mass in a few hours, but until then, I can go and help you with your problem." He begged my patience for a few minutes, as he took out the stole of his office and checked the bag to make sure he had the things he would need. He took a tin from his desk, and I saw that it was full of the host, the wafers they use for communion. He took an old worn Bible from his desk and placed it under one arm, as he told me to lead the way. He rode with me to my apartment, and the second we came to the front, I knew something was off. The sky over St. Marco's had been blue and clear, but the sky over my apartment was full of angry clouds, and the wind that whipped the father's robes felt like a hurricane. The people inside looked out the window and marked us, more than a few of them crossing themselves as we walked inside. I think they had felt a darkness gathering around the apartment as well, and they hoped that Father McGhee might be able to dispel whatever had been haunting them. There were police cars in front of the main office, and I could see the officers inside talking to the building supervisor. I tensed as we walked past them, not sure what fresh hell had happened while I was away. "Gavin," said the building super, "these men are here about the disappearance of the girl in E12. You haven't seen her recently, have you?" He seemed almost hopeful, and why shouldn't he be? His own child, his newborn baby, had gone missing less than a month ago. It had put a pall over the whole building, and sometimes you could hear him roving up and down the halls, calling for her at night. The bottle in his hand led us all to believe that the drink had driven him to it. He hoped that maybe if they found this girl, the 9-year-old who had so often skipped down the stairs on her way to school, that they would find his baby as well. They would all be safe and sound together, and the girl's family wouldn't be the only one to have a happy reunion that day. I personally doubted they would ever find a trace of either of them, unless the offering I had flushed had made its way into the sewer somehow. I told him I didn't know, but I got the feeling that the priest didn't quite believe me. The police said that if I discovered any information, to let them know immediately, and I said that I would. One of them, an older cop with a salt and pepper mustache, didn't seem like he believed me either. But he let me leave, and as we went upstairs, the old priest asked me about it. "You suspect that the missing girl is connected with your problem, don't you?" I didn't look at him, but I nodded. "I've found things in the apartment the last few weeks. Hair barrettes and small toys, a kid's shoe under the couch, and but I couldn't bring myself to tell him about the little foot. And yet, you came to me, instead of the police. I almost laughed. Father, I barely thought you would believe me. Imagine what kind of luck I would have, going to the cops and telling them that the missing children they've been searching for are being taken by a 20-pound house cat. He accepted my answer, but I started to wonder if I should have told anyone about it. I've been getting rid of things I find, putting them at the bottom of my garbage and praying that no one would find them. I knew what it would mean if they did. They might not believe that a cat had done it, but they would certainly believe that I had done it. They would find no evidence of my involvement, nothing besides Calvin's grisly trophies, but that would be enough. I'd be spending my time on death row after that, and Calvin would be free to roam again. We came out of the stairwell, and it almost seemed like the lights on my floor were dimmer. The budget for lights had likely never been very large, but a strange haze seemed to cover everything, and it made the whole floor look darker. I saw the father take something out of his pocket, and I was not surprised to see it was a crucifix. He had noticed it too, and he wasn't about to walk blindly into the den of evil. When we came to the door of my apartment, he put a hand on my shoulder as I slid the key in. "Open the door, but let me go in first." "Are you sure that's wise?" "I don't want whatever this is to have a chance to take you and make my job harder. Let me go in first and follow behind me. I will do what must be done, and one way or another, your problems will be at an end." I didn't much care for the implications, but I suppose there was no other way. I turned the lock and opened the door. The darkness in the hallway had been nothing compared to the darkness in my apartment. It was the middle of the day. Even with the clouds outside, there should have been some ambient light. Instead, the inside of the apartment was as black as midnight. It almost felt like a blackout, but only for my particular unit. I reached in to try to flip the switch, but the priest pushed my hand away and stepped into the doorway. His crucifix sprung to life, the brightness that of a spotlight with a huge lumen count. Inside the apartment, I could see Calvin sitting on the back of the couch and looking questioningly at us. He had his head cocked to the side, as if to ask what we were doing, and it was such a normal gesture from a cat that I almost doubted what I had felt. Had I been wrong? Had I misread the situation? Now I had drugged this priest from his duties and wasted his time. I started to apologize to the old man, but one look at his face told me that he did not share my opinion. As he began to chant in low but solid Latin, Calvin went crazy. He fell off the back of the couch, beginning to roll on the hardwood, and as the priest advanced on him, he didn't let up at all. Calvin was writhing in pain, his eyes wide as if to ask what was happening. The priest took something out of the bag with his free hand, his eyes never leaving the cat. When he spritzed him with the holy water, Calvin rolled and leaped at him. It was so quick that I didn't think the priest had been expecting it, and when the scratch appeared on his cheek, he dropped the bottle and reeled back in pain. He never dropped the crucifix, though, the glowing talisman seeming to be a part of his body. Calvin scampered off into the house, and I could swear that the fur he left behind was singed. There was a smell in the air like burning hair, and as I made to go after him, the priest put an arm out to stop me. "Stay with me. He's a wily old soul. He'll have you if he's able, now that his latest form is compromised." He really is a demon, then?" I asked, not sure if I had ever really believed it. I was behind the priest as we tracked towards the kitchen, but I could still see his nod in the gloom. "There are many such demons who hide in animals, because they know it's not what humans expect. This allows them to work great evil, knowing that their unwitting owners will not believe that their favorite pet is capable of such things." As we came into the kitchen, I could see the light from the fridge as it suddenly spilled across the floor. The intrusion into the blackness made me nervous, but the priest seemed to expect it. He lifted some of the host from the tin, holding it like he meant to throw it. The harsh light was the only illumination in the space, but I instinctively looked up as we came in, catching the eyes just before he leapt. Calvin had always had a thing for being up high, and not a day went by that I didn't have to shoo him off the top of the cabinets. For an old guy, the priest was amazingly agile. He spun before I could even warn him, pressing the host to Calvin's face as he came screeching down on us. As it disintegrated, he grabbed him by the throat and bore him to the ground, pressing the crucifix to his brow as the cat clawed at him. I could see the priest's arm growing red as the skin was torn, but he held him against the linoleum, chanting Latin at the flailing beast. The cross glowed brightly, the harsh fluorescence sending steam up from the fluffy tom, and when his hand suddenly released, there was nothing left but some flying bits of fur and the harsh jingle of his collar as it fell to the ground. The priest sucked in a breath of pain, but smiled as he shook the remaining ginger strands from his fingers. "I'm sorry. It appeared that the demon wasn't inside your cat." I looked at him strangely, not quite getting it. The demon was your cat. I don't know why it took him so long to manifest, or even what brought it on, but your furry friend was of hell. I have sent him back, but if you notice anything strange in the future, don't hesitate to call me. He took his leave then, refusing any form of payment, and I'm happy to say that most of the oddities around the apartment have ceased. The girl from floor E was the last one to go missing, and some of that gloom that hung around the apartment has faded. No sign of the children was ever found, but I pray that their parents find some solace as time goes on. I got a dog to replace Calvin, a German shepherd that was looking for a good home, and he seems pretty happy to be my new friend. He does bark at nothing from time to time, especially in the kitchen, but I'm sure that's just a normal thing for dogs to do. I miss Calvin sometimes, and I still mourn him and his brothers and the lives that were lost to this hell kitty, but I'm sure that he's where he belongs now. One last story for you. Then I think it'll be time to call it quits for today. But don't worry, I think in this case I've saved the best for last. I don't really have much of a preamble for this one. I don't know if any of you have ever been to space or been on the space station. I kinda doubt it, but you never know. I've got a very diverse audience. If you are, though, ever in space, let's hope you're never standing on the bridge when the Earth disappears. I'm standing on the International Space Station's revolving deck as I write this to no one in particular. Every 30 seconds, it rotates around so you can see the Earth as it hangs in space. I was entranced by the calm little ball of water and dirt from the first time I saw it. It's so easy to forget how chaotic it is down there. From the cold and silent reaches of space, you forget that the Earth is full of honking horns and screaming people. It's so easy to forget that terror exists in places other than Earth. I was honored, thrilled even, when they told me I had been selected to reside on the International Space Station. I'd been dreaming of space since I was a little kid. Like many kids my age, I had decided that I wanted to be an astronaut. Unlike many kids my age, though, I meant it. Every class, every grade, every extracurricular, and every internship had been tailored to get me to this point in my life. Every move I had ever made had brought me to this point, standing on the rotating viewing platform so I can watch the Earth circle around. At least, I could until about 8 hours ago. I awoke at 6 a.m., International Space Station time, as I do every day. I took my morning shower, made my first cup of coffee of the day, and walked into my kitchenette to make my breakfast. Then I took my breakfast to the rotating platform so I could eat it as I watched the Earth roll lazily by. But when I came to the platform that morning, I was in for a surprise. As I glanced out of the thick glass window, I was greeted with nothing. I could see a few satellites drifting lazily through the inky vortex. I could see the usual collection of debris just waiting to burn up in Earth's atmosphere. I could see the stars as they twinkled in the darkness of space. I could see the other planets as they winked further from the station. What I could not see was Earth. I can still see my broken coffee cup as it spreads its liquid across the floor. My overturned bowl of oatmeal is sitting near it. I'm standing not 10 feet away from the place I stood when I discovered there was no Earth. As I sit writing, I can hear the sounds of chaos that have invaded my once peaceful haven. The crew is going mad, running rampant with panic. They now know what it must feel like to be a newborn who's been clipped from his umbilicus. Hal laughed when I told him what I had seen. Hal is the communications officer for the station, and he thought I was joking with him. When it became clear that I wasn't joking, he tried to hail the command center in California, just to put my mind at ease. They would pick up, and I would see that the whole thing was just a big misunderstanding. When they didn't answer, he seemed unsure, but not alarmed. "That's just interference. I'll try the center in Florida," he said with a little laugh. No answer. He tried to hail system control in 5 different countries. No answer. We attempted to contact anyone within the sound of our voice, and also received no answer. Only then did he come to the observation deck with me and verify that there was no Earth. Someone's crying. I can hear them sobbing from the crew quarters as I sit and stare into the void. There were a lot of people mourning when the Earth disappeared. When I left my room and walked out here, I could see the signs of suicide as well. Ravita, one of our science team members, was lying on her bed as I walked by. The door was open, and she looked so peaceful as she lay there. Still, I knew she must be dead. A line of foam slid from the corner of her mouth, and her chest moved not at all. Others had hung themselves. You could see them hanging like strange wind chimes from the vents in their rooms. There were no firearms on the station, but I could hear the research lab table saw running full blast, and I could guess what sort of business it was doing. Others were using this as an excuse for bad behavior. The mess hall was full of people, eating the food stores and drinking what little alcohol we had available on the station. I was sure a certain amount of rape and murder were going on as well. As I stood there stargazing, though, it hardly seemed to matter. Very little matters now. We are adrift, our umbilicus cut, and we're all living on borrowed time. The air would cycle through the air handlers indefinitely. That was a given. But without food and water, we would die. Our food comes on a shuttle from Earth once a month. We were not equipped to grow our own food. No seeds, very little soil on board. Once our food is gone, we will starve. At the rate we were eating the food in the mess hall, we'd be lucky to have food for the week. I put a hand against the glass, momentarily dizzy. I see the red handprint left behind and know I have to finish writing this quickly. They've left me alone for now, but if the puddle of blood oozing into my chair is any indication, I don't have very long. Hal and I took our findings to the head researcher. Vaughn looked over the numbers, checked the data, and then came with us to the observation deck to see for himself. By this point, several of the researchers and the other station staff had gathered to look out into space, hoping to find that familiar blue orb we all loved so much. When they saw him, they all came to Vlan for answers. Vlan was stoic in the face of their fear, answering their questions evenly and putting their minds at ease. I'd known Vlan for years, an Israeli native drifting towards old age, and I had never seen him lose his cool. He didn't start now. "I don't know what has happened, but I think what is important is that we not panic. We were hand-picked for this mission, and we must act like we deserve to be here. Go about your duties as you would any other day. When news surfaces, I will let everyone know." He called a meeting with Boggs, head of security, Mortimer, director of operations, Charlie, Hal, and myself. Charlie was my boss, the head researcher under Vlan, and very, very British. "I believe the most important thing here is to maintain order. We have around 100 people on board, men and women, and if anarchy breaks out, then we may never over this." "Over this?" Mortimer asked skeptically. "Pull your head out of your ass, Charles. The Earth is gone." "We don't know that," Charles stated, wiping his bald head with a handkerchief. "I've got eyes, same as you, and they tell me the Earth is not where it's supposed to be. Now, either we've drifted, or we aren't where we're supposed to be, or—" "Oh, don't pretend you know a damn thing about what's going on here," Charles shot back hotly. "We pay you and your wrench jockeys to fix the air handlers, keep the pneumatic doors running, and maintain the systems on the station. You're no astronomer, Mortimer, not by a long shot." Mortimer turned red as he stepped closer to the blustery Englishman. Mortimer was no egghead, that was for certain, but he had served in 2 wars and was the most exceptional nuclear submarine tech the program could have laid hands on. He was also a bristling mass of service tattoos and sculpted muscle. I had seen him working out in the gym, giving the heavy bag a run for its money daily. Charles was about to learn what that bag knew for a certainty. "Just because I didn't go to some fancy university doesn't mean I'm country dumb, you little insect." "Gentlemen, please," Bland shouted, bringing the 2 back to their senses. "We have a problem, and your fighting is not helping. We have not drifted. Our telemetry tells us that we are occupying the same position in space that we've been holding since the beginning. We have not moved, unless our telemetry is wrong." "It's not," Charles said smugly. "Then something has happened to the Earth. It's our job to keep the peace, Mortimer. Tell your people to go about their tasks as they would. Boggs, tell your security staff to maintain order and not get too excited. I don't want public hangings, but I do want to see malcontents going to the brig. Charles, keep your people on task and keep their minds occupied. Maybe you could push forward our agricultural programs for the time being. Food may become a priority. Dismissed." He may have dismissed them, but their animosity remained. For the next few hours, tensions slowly built between the science team and the maintenance team. Mortimer could be seen talking to his crew, casting dark looks at anyone from the science team that got too close. The talk was loud and angry, and many of Boggs' security crew would also be seen in these discussions. Boggs seemed to share Mortimer's outlook on the current situation. The 2 were soldiers, after all, and saw us as little more than egghead civilians who thought too much of themselves. Charles was just as bad. He sealed off the science lab and put us to work on greenhouse projects. He stormed around like a rat in a cage, snapping at people for no reason, and confiding to his group of favorites about the stupid roughnecks who thought they were better than us. He kept looking towards the door fervently, and I knew he was thinking the same thing I was. Boggs had an override key to all the doors on the station, and if those roughnecks decided that they wanted into the lab, there wasn't a goddamn thing we could do about it. At 10:30, Vlan called Charles. The 2 had a very heated discussion, as quietly as possible, of course, but it was evident that something was going on. Charles turned pale towards the end, and his eyes kept slipping back to the door. He was afraid of something out there, more fearful than I'd ever seen him. When the phone suddenly went dead, he put it in the cradle with all the reverence of a casket going into the ground. They made their move around noon. We had heard some dissident noises from outside, but Charles wouldn't let us leave. He told us to keep working and never mind what we heard. The missing members were not commented on. They had never shown up this morning, but we all just kept doing our best. As the noises came closer, I saw many of the scientists looking anxiously at the door. We all glanced over when it opened, and our fear was realized. In walked 8 members of Boggs' security detail, followed by Mortimer and 8 of his maintenance crew. As I mentioned, there were no guns on the station, but they all had batons or wrenches or knives from the kitchen tucked into their belts. They blocked the door as they fanned out, and it was apparent what they intended to do. Charles was livid. "What are you about? We're performing serious work in here, so if you could just—" "By order of Overseer Boggs, we are taking the science team into custody," Mortimer announced, a huge grin spreading across his face. "Overseer? Vlan will have something to say about this. When I tell him what you've done, he'll—" But as he approached Mortimer, the big man swung a monkey wrench he'd had in his hand and scattered Charles's teeth and blood across the lab. Charles fell like a sack of oats, and pandemonium ensued. We all broke, making for the door and hitting the wall of guards. I don't remember how I got away. All I remember was a brilliant flash of pain in my side, and someone bumped me hard. Suddenly I was in the hall, running for Vlan's quarters. The corridor rang with screams and noise. People were running as other science teams were being rounded up by security staff. As I ran, dodging groups of security staff as they chased others, I was aware again of the pain in my abdomen. That's when I looked down and saw the handle sticking out of my side. The blade it was attached to was long and sharp, a kitchen knife used for boning fish. When I pulled it out, it was red with my blood, and the blood wasted little time in dribbling out of the new hole. I shrugged out of my lab coat and tried to tie it off like a tourniquet, but it did little more than give the blood something new to stain. I felt a little dizzy. I wanted to sit down, but I knew this was the wrong time to do it. I kept going, hoping Vlan would bring peace to the station, but I already feared what I would find when I got to his office. I didn't even have to go in to see what they'd done to him. He was slumped over his desk in a pool of his own blood. Someone, probably Boggs, had cut his throat for him and left him where he lay. I turned to go, and at that minute, I think I was already planning on coming here to die. I dropped the knife on the floor and walked unnoticed through the hall. I saw bodies, I heard the screams, but I was ambivalent to them, as I was to the vacuum outside. I couldn't help them, and they couldn't save me. So, what was the point of belaying the inevitable? My eyesight is getting foggy now. I think I came here hoping to see Earth blink back into existence before I die. I don't know if I really was or not, but it would make me feel better to know that there still is an Earth out there. As chaotic as those billions of humans are, I don't think I want the few of us still alive here to be what my species will be judged by. They've proven that humanity, even the best of humanity, will revert back to apes at a moment's notice. Survival of the fittest, even in space, is not a hallmark I want on display, but it seems to be what this station's history will be left with. I'm going to sleep now. My fingers are numb. The rest seems like a good idea. If this is truly my final message, then take some solace in knowing that I died doing what I loved. I died among the stars, hoping for hope for the Earth and its people. And just like that, our stories have come to an end for another day. But don't be sad. I'm sure we'll be back again very soon with more great tales spent with great company here on Cozy Horror. Till then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.